I'm Christian Bryant. Folks, it's Black History Month, the shortest month of the year. Since we're not here for a long time, we're gonna make it a good time. Tonight, we're hitting a wide range of stories that don't just examine Black history that's already happened, we're also looking ahead at history in the making. Black communities across the country are being reshaped by another great migration. We'll tell you more about where people are going and what that means for the places seeing an exodus and others welcoming a surge of Black residents. Plus, we'll tell you about an effort to preserve and restore Black film history from the silent film era and beyond, and why that effort is so urgent. But first, there's an interesting trend we're seeing across cities today that calls back to a seismic transition period in American history. Today, there's a noticeable shift in Black Americans moving from northern metro areas to the southern cities. That can have a huge impact on local culture and communities. Take Chicago, for example, which has historically been an economic capital for Black-owned local and national businesses. The city used to be home to the headquarters of Ebony Magazine, Oprah Winfrey's Harpo Studios, and 5 of the nation's largest Black-owned banks, including Independence Bank, just to name a few. Today, each of these has either shuttered or moved outside the city. All 5 of those banks have either closed or are no longer Black-owned. The demographic shift has huge political implications too, and nowhere has this been clearer on the national level than in Georgia. Between 2000 and 2019, Black eligible voters accounted for nearly half of Georgia's growth of eligible voting population. And in the 2020 presidential election, Joe Biden did exceptionally well in the Atlanta area, a fast-growing and increasingly diverse region, which was key in tipping the state blue. So it's worth taking a closer look at what may be going on here and look at some of the reasons why this shift to southern cities may be happening. First, let's take a look at who's going where. According to census data, we see the most sizable shift to and from major cities. For example, the Black population of Metro Atlanta more than doubled between 1990 and 2020, surpassing Chicago as the metro area with the second largest concentration of African Americans outside of New York. Black populations in greater Houston and Dallas-Fort Worth rose above 1 million for the first time. The population more than doubled in Metro Charlotte, and even smaller areas saw big gains like San Antonio, Raleigh, Greensboro, Orlando, and Little Rock. Meanwhile, cities up north like Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Cleveland, New York, and San Francisco all saw varying degrees of declines. Now, we've seen major demographic shifts in Black populations across the country before, most famously with the Great Migration. The Great Migration was a demographic transformation that began in the early 20th century. At the turn of the century, nearly 9 in 10 African Americans lived in the South. 9 in 10, and predominantly in rural areas. But then, over the century, between about 1910 and 1970, an estimated 6 million African Americans left the South for states up north, in the Midwest and the West. By the 70s, New York, Illinois, and California had the greatest African American populations. A huge reason for the move? The abundance of local jobs and the promise of economic opportunity in industrial sectors. And that eventually included jobs for women, as many men left the workforce during the 2 World Wars. And of course, many African Americans were escaping from restrictive Jim Crow laws across the South that established different rules for Black and white Americans. Many of these were first passed in the economic depression of the 1890s in response to Reconstruction after the Civil War, and that would last through the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. Then, just as the Great Migration finally trailed off in the 1970s, the phenomenon slowly began to reverse, and families moved back south, accelerating in the 90s and even further into the 2000s. And the reasons behind this new migration aren't too different from the old ones. First, a major one is jobs. Most of the fastest growing cities in the country are in the South and the West, and we're seeing many families reportedly moving with a job already offered or for the chance for economic growth. But according to recent reporting from the census and the Washington Post, another major concern was housing and housing affordability. Discriminatory policies like redlining kept many Black communities in major cities locked out of developing generational wealth. The racial wealth gap has only been growing, and in many major cities in the North, lack of access to education, public transportation, and other basic needs have been hugely influential. For many, there may also be extended family or cultural ties to the South, which makes the move even more appealing. There are differences in the two movements, though. While the Great Migration first saw African Americans leaving rural areas for northern cities, this trend is seeing more movement from cities to cities. The rate of growth is also considerably slower than in the beginning of the 20th century. The percentage of the country's black population has grown in the southern states by just 4 percentage points overall since 1970. But even so, mass city exodus is clearly identifiable and worth studying even further. These kinds of demographic shifts tell us a lot about the differences in economic inequality and perceived opportunity across regions in the US. And they can also tell us a lot about the ways in which our country, for better and worse, so often repeats itself. Chicago is seeing an exodus of Black Americans, and it's already feeling the impact of such a dramatic change. National correspondent Ben Shamiso introduces us to one family that made the change and tells us more about exactly why.
Why do y'all watch this?
For the Parks family, living in this brand new house
We have 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms,
is a dream come true.
and I've always wanted an island.
A dream they pursued for years on the south side of Chicago,
Are the 2 little ones, the little one?
until they decided 5 years ago
I could have been in the crossfire too.
that they had seen enough
If you needed food right away, you have to drive a far distance in order to get it.
and tried their luck 30 miles southeast in St. John, Indiana, a much smaller place
My very happy cornfield that I love.
with better rated public schools and a lower cost of living.
Taxes are a lot lower. I mean, it's hard to tell now, but food is still less expensive out here.
The Parks say they couldn't be happier with their decision to leave the Windy City behind.
I'm convinced 100%.
The Parks are among more than 250,000 Black Chicagoans who left Chicago over the past 20 years, often to neighboring states like here in Indiana or south to Texas, Georgia, and Arizona. Chicago's Black population dropped by 10% over the last decade, continuing a steady decline since peaking in the 1980s.
It's a quintessential story of a disinvestment in the areas that Black people live in, on the South Side.
Black people have long shaped the culture and identity of the country's third largest city, a popular landing spot during the Great Migration. An estimated 500,000 African Americans moved here from the South at the beginning of the 20th century.
This has been a Black Mecca for so long.
But gun violence and lack of jobs and good schools in the city's predominantly Black neighborhoods are pushing people out.
It's the confluence. If it was any one of these factors, I think people would be able to, negotiate them and stay. People love Chicago.
When I was younger, I don't remember a whole bunch of vacant lots like this.
Aisha Butler could have long left Englewood, a once vibrant Black community that is now one of Chicago's most violent and run-down neighborhoods.
A lot of shootings were happening on the block. And we just said a lot of our family left to go to Georgia. We might as well follow them there.
But she decided to stay put and fight for change as the head of a group that aims to revive the area.
This is a vacant elementary school. My brother actually went here, and us, in a collaboration with other organizations, are going to revamp this to be housing and a clinic.
Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot declined to be interviewed for this piece. She has vowed to address the disparities that have long plagued the city. One of her signature projects is a $750 million plan to develop pockets of the south and west sides, including Englewood. But Butler says it's not enough.
Right now in West Southwest, the projects that they're working on is centered in one location, whereas we have all of this that needs to be invested in.
Chicago's Black exodus is also shifting its politics. Latinos recently overtook Black people as the city's largest minority, prompting a political fight between the two groups over how to redraw the city's electoral map. As for the Parks family in Indiana,
You remember all your friends from Ariel?
they haven't entirely closed the door on Chicago.
I still would love to live downtown. I'm not giving up on Chicago.
But not with kids.
Ben Shamiso, Newsy, Chicago.
All right, Ben, thanks so much for your reporting. We're going to take a quick break. When we're back, We're talking to a well-known civil rights leader about the continued fight for justice, police reform, and what inspired his newest book.
And we need to, while I have some of this spotlight, talk about people that never got the light, but made movements happen.
Welcome back, folks. As you know, this is our Black History Month special, and I know you don't want to hear me talk the whole time. So, we're bringing in somebody who knows a thing or two about fighting for justice for Black communities. For decades, Reverend Al Sharpton has been a civil rights leader. He's the founder and president of the National Action Network and a pretty visible presence in calls for justice. In his new book, Righteous Troublemakers, he highlights some of the lesser-known figures and untold stories in the civil rights movement. Reverend Sharpton, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so let's start with the book, Rev. I feel like there's never a bad time to highlight contributions from overlooked people in the fight for civil rights and justice, but take me back to the moment you decided that there needed to be a more thorough accounting of these people, some of whom we know and some we don't know. When did you first see this book start to take shape?
I had been called by George Floyd's family, Brother Philonis, and Attorney Ben Crump, to come to Minneapolis. They wanted me to go because of what had happened to George Floyd. And they wanted us to really say that National Action Network and I would be involved in helping to organize some of the protests. For whatever reason, I was moved in the middle of the eulogy to say, and we're going to march on Washington. And we're going to bring people there and demand we deal with police on the anniversary of Dr. King's March on Washington. We get to the date, August 28th, and we have all the families there, George Floyd's family, Breonna Taylor's mother, Ahmaud Arbery's mother and father, about 15 families. And we're in the tent behind Lincoln Memorial. And to our happy surprise, about 200,000 people showed up. And as I was going through the crowd, I saw an old man jumping up and down with something in his hand. And for whatever reason, he caught my eye. And I said to security, what is that old man doing? He looked like he's in his 80s. What is he trying to tell me? And they brought him over to me. And he showed me this object in his hand. It was a button, and it said, March on Washington, freedom now. He said, I wore this button in 63 here with Dr. King, and I wanted to be here with you today. And he hugged me, and he got back in the crowd. And it haunted me. I said, here's a guy, was here in 63, here today. Nobody knows his name. He will not be on the news tonight. He'll not be in the Washington Post tomorrow. I don't know how he paid to get here. I don't know how he's going home. But those are the people that made the movement work. And we need to, while I have some of this spotlight, talk about people that never got the light, but made movements happen. And that's when I decided to sit down and research some stories of people that would not be household names, but it was their pivotal contribution that made this movement go forward.
Yeah, and I know in the book there are chapters, sub-chapters of so many of these folks that are kind of being covered, and so many of their stories as well. Some of the people highlighted were women and members of the LGBT plus community. I'm curious to know, from your perspective, why has it taken so long for these people to get their flowers, and how has the culture of organizing changed to make sure those voices are included in activism today?
I think that a lot of it is the culture change. And I think you have to have the courage to stand up to it. I never understood how you could not let Bayard Rustin, who organized the 63 March on Washington, not have his due because he was gay. It hurt us to deal with the fact that people did not get credit that they were due. And they didn't want it for their ego, but it is our story. And we need to know our story. So I talk about in the book, Attorney Paulie Murray, who wrote a lot of the legal strategies and the legal theories that Thurgood Marshall used in Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court case. They would not expose or give a lot of exposure to Paulie Murray because she was a woman and gay.
I want to talk to you a bit about police reform. We've seen some accountability for police killings of Black men and women lately. Of course, there are broader reforms that you'd like to see made, but looking at this after decades of pushing for change, do you see any progress in how police are being held accountable for violence that often targets Black Americans?
Well, there's been progress on local levels. Like in New York State, we have the Eric Garner anti-choking law. We need federal law, the George Floyd Justice and Police Act, which would be federal, so that we don't need to go state by state. We can go with a federal law.
I'm also curious to know, in thinking about contemporary activism, I mean, what is it that gives you hope? What is it that makes you, very, joyous and hopeful about the progress that, that's been made or that will be made?
Well, it gives me hope is that every once in a while, there's a breakthrough, and if you keep going, you can keep breaking through. When I started with Ahmaud Arbery's family and Attorney Crump, it looked hopeless. Then they would not arrest the killers in Brunswick, Georgia, rural Brunswick, Georgia, not a big city. Finally, we kept pressing, got them arrested, and then went down there and they picked a jury, 11 whites and 1 black, jury of 12. When the jury came back, 11 white convicted 3 white men. In a city, they're going to have to live with their neighbors. Stuff like that gives you hope that when you see people would stand up in rural Georgia and say, no, this black kid should not be dead. That is things that if you keep going, unlikely things will happen.
Reverend Al Sharpton is a civil rights leader, the founder and president of the National Action Network, and author of the new book, Righteous Troublemakers, Untold Stories of the Social Justice Movement in America. Reverend Sharpton, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we're back, we're looking at the hurdles many Black men can encounter on their way toward a healthier lifestyle. Welcome back to In the Loop, folks. The pandemic has had a disproportionately deadly impact on men, particularly Hispanic and Black men. For Black men, researchers referred to the high rate of COVID-19 deaths as a syndemic. It happens when multiple epidemics interact to exacerbate health consequences. Newsy national correspondent Amber Strong talked to a man who experienced a little bit of both and shows us how he was able to get back to a healthy lifestyle.
See, even while exercising, I still gotta work.
Gary Brown is as healthy as they come these days.
No, man.
But that wasn't the case 2 years ago.
There were days where I could only get to 15 minutes and I had to call it quits.
It started with what he thought was a cold. Then,
Night sweats, fatigue, a lot of coughing.
Brown's journey with COVID-19 came in March of 2020, long before there was a vaccine.
The World Health Organization just declared the coronavirus a global emergency.
And while the world was still getting to know the virus that would claim more than 875,000 lives nationwide.
And there were days when I was in so much pain that I said, Lord, if it's your will, take me.
He would recover eventually, but continue to suffer with long-haul symptoms for months.
If I get through this, I need to take my health more seriously. And I said, I know I'm gonna need help from you. So that was my prayer.
The longtime trainer and wellness director says he knew how to be healthier, but wasn't living up to it, avoiding his diabetes medication, doctor's appointments, and consuming unhealthy food.
I'll just go for a brisk walk, so I'm not doing anything too strenuous.
Now he's changed his lifestyle and is encouraging anyone who listens to make changes within their power, especially fellow Black men.
I don't know if it's just drilled in our heads that we're, as Black men, we're the provider of the house, we're the head of the house. We take care of everybody else, and we forget about ourselves.
Men in general are more likely to die from COVID-19 than women. But according to the CDC, life expectancy has dropped to its lowest point since 2003 thanks to the pandemic. And the hardest hit, Hispanic and Black men, declining 3.7 years for Hispanic males and 3.3 for Black males. If COVID-19 has done anything positive at all, it's that it's highlighted the serious health disparities across the U.S. African Americans account for a high percentage of diabetes, obesity, and sickle cell disease, all underlying conditions tied to severe cases of COVID-19. It's called a syndemic, 2 or more epidemics interacting, exacerbating health consequences. In a study published in the Surgeon General's Public Health Reports, researchers described the high rate of COVID-19 deaths among Black men like this. The immune responses associated with being obese and having hypertension are activated and exacerbated by chronic stress and biological aging processes that are rooted in structural racism.
Number one, do you have access to quality health care? Do you have the ability to get off of work to go to the doctor? Do you have paid sick time off? If you live in a space where you don't have access to public transportation.
Experts call them social determinants of health. Those determinants, like access to health care, healthy food, and even the job you work, may be a good indicator on how well you'll battle something like COVID-19.
Studies have shown that when we get rid of some of those barriers that we've just talked about, some of those social determinants of health, when we create sort of a level playing ground, that we can see improved outcomes. We see it in colorectal cancer when patients are actually offered the same treatment that their white counterparts are receiving, that their outcomes are improved.
Brown says his gym is in the middle of a food desert. Many of his clientele are minorities and many senior citizens, so he knows it's an uphill battle when fighting a larger societal issue. Still, he says he's doing his part to encourage anyone who walks through those doors, recommending affordable food alternatives, exercise, and even helping them navigate the healthcare system.
But what happens to you affects your family. It affects your loved ones. So it's not just you.
Perfect. Form excellent.
Amber Strong, Newsy, Indianapolis.
All right, many thanks for that reporting, Amber. From the workplace to schools, oftentimes natural hair is not accepted as a professional look. It's discrimination that Black people have faced for generations. In response to that, roughly a dozen states have passed the Crown Act, a law that prohibits discrimination based on how people wear their hair. But according to the NAACP, 1 in 5 Black women still feel social pressure to straighten their hair for work. Black men have strayed away from wearing their hair in certain styles, like locks, to conform in a sense. Scripps national correspondent Jesse Cohen shows us how one hair care company is reminding Black women the beauty and strength behind their natural hair.
The culture of natural hair in this country is rooted in conformity.
I think there is an issue when you feel like you have to do it to fit in.
7 years ago, Monique Rodriguez decided it was time to own the crown on her head and inspire others to do the same.
7 years later, in every major retail in America, we are a global beauty brand.
She is now the CEO of MILLON Organics, one of the fastest growing natural hair care companies in the country.
MILLON is definitely a disruptor in this industry.
She noticed a prominent void in the Black hair care industry, one she has worked to fill.
My hair was always frizzy. I would mix things together because I couldn't find the right mix. And I said, well, if I can make a great product, great ingredients, and then educate my consumers on how to use the products, and then also be myself and be relatable and be authentic, that's a win-win situation.
Monique started on a different path, working as a nurse for 8.5 years, until one day things drastically changed.
In 2013 is when, my whole world literally turned upside down. My husband and I, we suffered a loss of my son when I was 8 months pregnant because I had a high-risk pregnancy. It really left me feeling very lost and confused and asking a lot of questions.
She knew it was time to take a risk and follow her heart. It all began with homemade concoctions, natural items from her kitchen and experiments in her garage, paired with social media videos to show the world her hair secrets she had discovered. Those videos are still a major part of her brand.
I try to use my platform to show that I can be in a professional setting and still have my natural hair. I can go to a board meeting and still wear my natural hair and still look presentable.
Time would prove her products were more than hair care. They are a source of confidence for women.
A lot of Black women don't, or in the past have not had people to look up to or people to look at and say, hey, I like her hair is healthy, I want my hair to be like that. We've always wanted something different than what we had, just to kind of fit in.
Jatina Nixon is the lead stylist at MILLON Organics and has years of experience working with different hair types. It wasn't until MILLON that she saw a shift in the attitude of her clients.
You now know that, hey, this is me, and it's a part of me. I can go out like this, like you said, I can go in public. I am accepted. I look beautiful. You know, this is me. This is what I have. It's Black girl magic.
The more and more we see it, the more we believe it. You know, I always say there's a saying that you can't be what you don't see. So we need to see more women that are on the red carpet in Hollywood, business owners, people that have notable platforms that are rocking their natural hair. So young girls that are growing up looking at us can see that, you know, oh, this is the hair I was born with and I don't have to change it. I don't have to conform.
This company has continued to break barriers, signing a $100 million investment deal.
It was something that was historic. It was groundbreaking because a Black-owned company, especially a female Black-owned company, does not get funding to that magnitude.
Monique says it's about showing the world what Black women are more than capable of, all while embracing their roots.
We can build great businesses. We just need the same support, the access, and the expertise as our counterparts have.
In Merrillville, Indiana, with photojournalist Luis Ramirez, I'm Jessie Cohen reporting.
Much appreciated, Jesse, for that story. It's time for another break, folks, but we still have plenty of content to round out the second half of the show. After the break, we're looking at the creation of the Black Film Archive and talk to the founder about what this new database represents. Welcome back, folks. You're watching a celebration of Black History Month here on In the Loop. And now we're shifting gears away from politics, economics, and health to get into some artistic history too. Earlier this year, we lost cinematic icon Sidney Poitier, a titan who broke barriers as the first Black man to be nominated for any acting Oscar in 1958. Unfortunately, since then, the list of Black Oscar winners is noticeably short. More than 60 years later, only 4 Black men have won Best Actor. Only 1 woman has won Best Actress. No Black directors, none have won Best Director. Awards, of course, aren't everything, but it's a pretty good indicator of how often Black film history and artists can go underappreciated or be overlooked. And that's what we want to help spotlight now. African American film history starts way earlier than you might think. There was a surprising number of Black directors, actors, and production companies active during the silent film era. One film database estimates there were more than 700 African American people in the industry, with over 300 films and about 17 companies. And just a reminder, the silent film era ran from the late 1800s to the 1920s. That's a huge deal. This was an era of mainstream entertainment with extremely harmful stereotypes and storylines. That was on display in the minstrel shows and through blackface in movies like The Jazz Singer or the infamous KKK propaganda machine, Birth of a Nation. But Black creators persisted. William Foster would be the first director with the short slapstick comedy, The Railroad Porter. Maria P. Williams was one of the first African-American women to make movies, directing the mystery drama Flames of Wrath. Companies like the Ebony Film Corporation and others made wide-ranging genres with all Black casts and crew, movies that were collectively known as race pictures. And then there was the legendary director and first African-American movie mogul, Oscar Micheaux. Born to a family of formerly enslaved people in rural Illinois, Micheaux would go on to have a prolific career of films fully tackling race, segregation, censorship, and more. His first film, The Homesteader, which was based on his own book of the same name, premiered in 1919 in a packed theater in Chicago. It was an epic 80-minute feature. For context, Charlie Chaplin wouldn't make his first feature-length picture for another 2 years. And Micheaux's next epic, Within Our Gates, would take direct aim at Birth of a Nation, subverting its racist tropes and highlighting the violence of white supremacy in the South. Unsurprisingly, it was quickly banned across southern states. But today, it's on YouTube. And I'm just scratching the surface. There's a rich history that can be found in Black films of the silent era, but without financial support to maintain production companies and preserve work properly, many of these pictures were lost to time. For example, only a single frame remains of Flames of Wrath, the first and only film directed by Maria P. Williams. An estimated 80% of silent movies with all Black casts are thought to be lost. There's been renewed momentum for researchers to restore and preserve much of Black film history that's been lost or overlooked from the silent film era and beyond. Newsy's entertainment correspondent Casey Mendoza tells us more about those efforts and why the work is so urgent.
Some of the most important films provide moving snapshots of American history, giving today's audiences front row seats to the country's past. But Black filmmakers have long been left out of cinema canon, and film archivists are having to correct those past mistakes.
It was time to really say, okay, we need to make sure that there's diversity in what is preserved and what's brought to the attention.
As the Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden oversees the National Film Registry, a growing archive of movies, documentaries, and short films that reflect U.S. history. Every year, 25 films are inducted into the archive, and last year's selection was the most diverse, including more titles from women and filmmakers of color, movies that highlighted the country's history of racially motivated violence, and films that reflected Black communities from the 90s all the way to the early 1900s.
Look, I come here to have a good time like everybody else.
Cooley High, from director Michael Schultz, was one of the latest inductees to the National Film Registry. It came out in 1975 and told the story of a group of Black teenagers in the Chicago neighborhood of Cabrini Green.
I remember the impact that had. A comedy about a group of friends in their last year of high school.
African-American filmmakers were finally starting to get chances to direct.
Cooley High was best known for authentically capturing what life was like for Black communities in the 70s, which made it stand out during Hollywood's blaxploitation period of heavily stereotyped portrayals. Because of that, Cooley High has been called a classic of Black cinema and a predecessor to the work of filmmakers like John Singleton and Spike Lee.
There are people in my age group now that really still talk about Cooley High as being so significant because they were seeing themselves reflected on the big screen. And that's the other part of representation, that what you see can reflect and really add to how you feel about yourself.
Hayden says there is a real urgency among historians to include more diverse voices in film archives. Since 1981, much of the work preserving Black cinema history was done at the Black Center and Archive at Indiana University. And last year, the website Black Film Archive was created by research fellow Maya Cade to curate roughly 250 Black films from 1915 to 1979. Outside of those archives, other groups are working to correct past oversights. Back in 2020, the New York Times reported that the Criterion Collection, a selective canon of some of the most important classic and contemporary films, included just 5 titles from 4 African American directors, out of over 1,000 films. The company says it is now working to hire more Black employees. These diversity efforts allow preservationists to better uncover the oft-forgotten parts of American history, which is also why the National Film Registry included this 3-minute video clip from 1902. Titled Ringling Brothers Parade Film, this short video captured a rare snapshot of an affluent African-American community in Indianapolis.
What richness you get out of that glimpse.
We just thought it was a great example to show that, these communities did exist.
And had community and had pride.
To aid the National Film Registry's broad and inclusive search for new inductees, the organization also leans on public submissions. Roughly 6,200 titles were offered last year. Casey Mendoza, Newsy.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Casey. And also, very cool that anyone can nominate a movie to the National Film Registry as long as it's over a decade old. We're gonna take a quick break while I go nominate CB4 starring Chris Rock and Alan Payne. When we're back, we're spotlighting Black comedians in late night with a very special guest from The Amber Ruffin Show. Stay tuned. Welcome back, folks. We could all use a good laugh, right? Late night talk shows are good for that. But as you know, It's not a super diverse industry, but that's part of what makes the Amber Ruffin Show so special. It's hosted by a Black woman, the first to write for a late-night network talk show in the U.S., and she's joined by a Black announcer, sidekick, and partner who just so happens to be our next guest. Tarek Davis, thanks so much for joining us on In the Loop.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And happy Black History Month, too. I feel like I want to say that while we're
we need to say it as much, as loudly as possible. Happy Black History Month. Like, say it until people's ears hurt.
I'll be doing that for the rest of the month. We don't have long, so you've been in comedy,
month of the year, right?
Right. You've been in comedy and acting for a while. I've seen the credits: UCB, Boom Chicago, Second City, and what's really changed today. I'm thinking of diversity of performers, audiences, platforms, etc.
I started in specifically improv comedy, which was a very white space. It's one of the reasons that Amber and I kind of bonded. I think those issues from 20 years ago, from when I started to now, they aren't as aggressively apparent, but there's still a lot of progress that needs to be made.
What is it that makes the show so special to you? And why are late night shows in particular so culturally significant?
What makes it special for me is I get to, I refer to Amber as my sister. And the fact that people get to watch us be goofy and make up the stupidest songs and make each other laugh, and people seem to enjoy it, like that, that will never get old to me. Late night shows can alleviate a little bit of that, can make you laugh a little bit about what you've gone through in that day before and get you ready for the next day. It's an intimate thing, bringing us into your home late at night and having us let you laugh.
Bringing people into our homes late at night. I mean, I don't think it gets more intimate than that. Well, it does get more intimate. It doesn't, but it is.
Now I regret kind of what I was saying. Like, you're letting us in your home and we're getting intimate and making you laugh. That's not what I meant. We're just all trying to.
That's a good way to put it, though. And I'm guessing for a lot of the audience members, seeing folks who look like them, who share some of the same experiences, that's got to be really special.
There's nothing better than getting stopped by an older Black woman being like, I see you, I see what you're doing, and I love it.
Started a late night show during the pandemic after summer protests and really hard conversations we were having to have with ourselves and each other. How do you all do comedy in an atmosphere like that? Or, some of this hasn't ended. How do you do comedy in an atmosphere like this?
There's a release valve. I know when I step in that studio and we see each other and we make each other laugh, there's a release. And I know for the first year that we were recording, there wasn't an audience. That release was the thing that I personally was seeking. This is scary. You're scared right now. Let's sing a song about it. Like, being honest as possible is where we find a lot of humor to mine.
And releasing that valve is, I know we made the joke earlier, but that's an intimate thing to give people a place to have a release, to, be able to, kind of laugh at the things that are terrifying us, or calling out the things that are terrifying us. That feels valuable and feels important.
Yeah, it does. Although, again, I regret my phrasing. Now I feel like I've been singing the Marvin Gaye song this whole time. You gotta release the valve.
Intimacy, release the valve. This is what people are going to take away from this interview.
I'm sorry. To the aunts and moms, I'm sorry. Like, I'm just...
Look, this is... It's only going to be, the church members from back home that are going to be watching this. So I'll let you kind of explain that to them. This moment feels pretty significant when it comes to Black comedy, especially on television. Is there anything you want to leave us with about where we're headed?
I think it was Ari Spears who talked about how there was a Black comedian a decade. You know, in the 60s, it was Red Fox, 70s, Richard Pryor, 80s, Eddie Murphy. And then there was an expansion in the 90s. And I think that expansion is continuing, but I think the subtle difference is the nuance of spectrum. Like, Black people are not a monolith. What Amber is doing, what Ashley Nicole Black and Robin Thede on Black Lady Sketch Show, what Issa Rae is doing on Insecure, they are all crushing it and all doing it on very different vibrations and widening the spectrum. And by doing that, they're widening the doors for different and more diverse voices of Blackness and outside Blackness to make people laugh, to come into their house, to release that valve, and to make people laugh sweet. I'm sorry. To make people have a good time.
I mean, you're spent. I'm not sure what else you have now. Like, you're
done. I'm done. No, yeah, I am pretty well spent. Yeah.
No, but this was a treat, man, because, you know, to get your perspective, your experience on the industry is valuable. You know, we love what it is that you've been able to do with the Amber Ruffin Show. Tarek Davis is an actor, writer, comedian. You can find him every week on the Amber Ruffin Shows we've talked about. He's going to go take a cold shower. Tarek, thank you so much for your time, brother.
Thank you, brother. Happy Black History Month and Valentine's Day.
Hey, happy Black History Month, man. You take care of yourself, all right? How y'all digging the special so far? If you like it, why don't you take this next commercial break to give me a shout on Twitter using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop. Or if there's a story you'd like to see covered during Black History Month, just get at me. The DMs are always open. Folks, we've covered a lot of ground in this episode, so we thought we'd circle back to some of our reporting from the top of the show in our Closing the Loop segment. Today, there is a noticeable shift in Black Americans moving from northern metro areas to the South. Take Chicago, for example, which has historically been an economic capital for Black-owned local and national businesses. The city used to be home to the headquarters of Ebony Magazine, Oprah Winfrey's Harpo Studios, and 5 of the nation's largest Black-owned banks, including Independence Bank, just to name a few. Today, each of these has either shuttered or moved outside the city. All 5 of those banks have either closed or are no longer Black-owned. The demographic shift has huge political implications too, and nowhere has this been clearer on the national level than in Georgia. Between 2000 and 2019, Black eligible voters accounted for nearly half of Georgia's growth of eligible voting population. Now, we've seen major demographic shifts in Black populations across the country before, most famously with the Great Migration. And the reasons behind this new migration aren't too different from the old ones. First, a major one is jobs. Most of the fastest growing cities in the country are in the South and the West, and we're seeing many families reportedly moving with a job already offered or for the chance for economic growth. But according to recent reporting from the Census and the Washington Post, another major concern was housing and housing affordability. Discriminatory policies like redlining kept many Black communities in major cities locked out of developing generational wealth. The racial wealth gap has only been growing, and in many major cities in the North, lack of access to education, public transportation, and other basic needs have been hugely influential. All right, folks, that's it for our special episode of In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. If you missed this episode, no worries. You can catch it on demand on the Newsy apps for the rest of February. See you next time.